We have international affairs analyst Dan Perry joining us in the studio, along with Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves Doron Avital, and who is a former commander in the IDF Special Forces, and of course our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran with us as well. All right, so I think obviously, one of the first questions that comes to mind for Israelis is what this means for the future of the ongoing war in regards to the issues now that Netanyahu and Gallant may face down the line. Gallant is no longer the acting defense minister, but obviously the prime minister does have many decisions that have yet to be made, especially when it comes to negotiating for a hostage and ceasefire deal.
Well, it may potentially cause him to act differently if he feels that a given action might harm his defense. But I doubt that's really going to be the case, because Netanyahu has no intention of standing trial. So he will undoubtedly use this to further his narrative that the world is against Israel, and the criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, and he has a pretty good tools at his disposal, because this decision undoubtedly is howlingly a brazen instance of selective justice. The International Criminal Court would have never conceived of issuing indictments and arrest warrants for the leaders of the Western alliance that took out Islamic State and caused tremendous civilian damage. The U.S. the Western world has never viewed warfare in this way. It's undoubtedly precedent-setting. And so since the decision, without question in my mind, has an element of political motivation behind it, it also gives tools to people who want to fight the court and implicitly, and this is more dangerous, fight all criticism of Israel by tainting it all with the same brush. But for Netanyahu, it's a huge complication in his life, because he can no longer go to Europe.
Political motivation, I kind of want to discuss that. I mean, why was this decision made right now? Why did Karim Khan decide to go through with issuing these arrest warrants at this point?
Well, some people will say it's a signal to Israel that it has to do things differently, but it's more than that, because arrest warrants are very, very difficult to reverse. There are ways to freeze them at the UN Security Council, but it's pretty much a done deal. So basically, this is a body representing 125 countries. That doesn't include the US, but does include the entire European Union. More than issuing a warning to Israel to do things differently, it's declaring that what Israel has done, in sum, has been unacceptable. And that's a very difficult reality for Israel. It opens up all kinds of possibilities, including sealed indictments that aren't known about, that potentially could exist. It creates a precedent for open indictments that could come still against, let's say, the head of the army. One thing that is worth considering is that Khan was careful not to indict based on actions during the war itself, the destruction in Gaza, but rather statements and actions that suggested a humanitarian issue, a supposed effort to starve the Palestinians by denying them humanitarian aid. And so the war actions are a little bit distinct from this humanitarian business. But one last thing that should be said, you will hear people saying that Khan had other skullduggeries motivating him because there's a massive sexual harassment scandal that basically broke the week in May that Khan declared that he was asking for these arrest warrants. And a lot of people were wondering why Khan was declaring it, because that too is without precedent. Generally, the indictments are only announced once the judges approve them. To put pressure on the judges by stating that you had requested it had never been done before in the 50 or so indictments that previous prosecutors had issued. So there's this sexual harassment thing, which is ongoing and potentially very embarrassing, involves an employee of the ICC. Some people will say that he was trying to distract attention from it.
An early indication we got from Republican Senator from Arkansas, Tom Cotton, who reminded everyone of the existence of what's called the Hague Invasion Act, which is from 2002, a bill that was introduced to protect U.S. military personnel from indictment abroad and also arrest warrants by the ICC. That was broadened to also include U.S. allies, the text of the law includes Israel. Now, what does this law stipulate? That the American president is authorized to use, quote, all means necessary and appropriate to free U.S. military personnel or covered ally persons who are charged with these arrest warrants.
Right.
So, for example, if Prime Minister Netanyahu decides to take a visit to, let's say, Rome, and Italian authorities decide to detain him in adherence to this arrest warrant, then theoretically, American president has the authority to send U.S. Marines to free him. Now, I doubt this scenario will actually come to play, but the reason Tom Cotton, the Republican senator from Arkansas, is reminding this is basically placing the gun on the table. The incoming Trump administration wants to show that it has a lot of tools at its disposal to act against the ICC. This is a deterring statement, but at the end of the day, I think we have not heard the last from Washington regarding the ICC and this decision, with Karim Khan issuing a statement not so long ago saying that he is further investigating additional violations in Jerusalem, the West Bank, and in Gaza.
One thing that I just want to ask you, I mean, we're hearing a range of different responses from the various members of the ICC. We're talking about over 120 countries. I mean, who seems to be supporting this decision? Who seems to be taking a step back and saying, you know, wait a second, this isn't right?
Canada and France have said that the ICC must be respected. Others haven't yet weighed in. Britain was famously skeptical and had tried to get the ICC to back down on jurisdiction grounds. But one important tool that we're going to start hearing about, that most Israelis had never heard about before, is Article 98 of the Rome Statute, where a member country can nonetheless say, we are giving immunity to this country. And Israel and all its dealings with, in particular, the European nations, is probably going to start asking that each of them sign an Article 98 on its behalf. And that would be a much easier way of getting Netanyahu and his wife to be able to visit Rome.
He's not indicted.
She's certainly going to be affected by this.
Yeah, no, without the U.S. needing to send the Marines to Rome.
Citizens of Israel, there is a lot of light in the dark. I appreciate the heartwarming mobilization of many friends around the world, and primarily our friends in the United States. They made it clear that this decision will have serious consequences for the court and for anyone who cooperates with it in this matter. I would also like to thank elected representatives in Israel across the political spectrum who stood as one against this despicable decision. Citizens of Israel, no outrageous anti-Israeli decision will prevent us and will not prevent me from continuing to defend our country in every way. We will not give in to pressure. Together we will stand, together we will fight, and with the help of God, together we will win.
All right, so we heard Netanyahu's response here. You know, Dan, I want to turn to you. I'm interested to kind of hear, explain to us what these warrants have been issued for, what Netanyahu stands accused of, and what he is speaking out against specifically in this video.
Netanyahu and Gallant made various statements early in the war that could be interpreted as suggesting that Israel would not send in water, food, things of this nature. That is against international law. Other members of the government and other politicians from the right especially, but not only, made even more outrageous statements. And none of these statements translated into policy. But they provided the legal foundation for the investigation, and ultimately for what I believe is an incorrect decision to indict them. Netanyahu is basically saying what we said before, that this is absurdly selective justice, or in this case, injustice. I mean, the world is full of horrible crimes against civilians committed by clearly terrible governments that are totally dictatorial, in some cases genuinely genocidal. The charges against Israel are obviously absurd. If Hamas gave up right now and coughed up the hostages, Israel would cease all attacks on Gaza. If Israel were intent on destroying the population of Gaza in whole or in part, which is genocide, then it wouldn't. that is not to say that its actions in Gaza are correct. If indeed it's true that over 20,000 civilians have been killed, you can say it's purely because Hamas uses them as shields, but you could also say something else. There's a big question mark about the degree of destruction visited upon Gaza.
Right.
And moreover, Netanyahu, putting even that aside, for the conduct of the war, for the refusal to organize an exit plan and a day after plan, for a lot of things that have gone wrong in this war, Netanyahu can stand credibly criticized. All this decision has done is given this prime minister an opportunity to stand up and be completely right about how he's being persecuted, and that doesn't happen every day. So in a way, in the Israeli political reality, they've helped him. And that's not necessarily good for Israel, because this government has been derelict in its duty to win this war quickly.
All right, well, yeah, I see that there's something that you want to add here, Doron.
Of course, clearly, we have to think that this gap between the rhetorics, which was stupid, and the action that the IDF conducted, which I think was conducted according to the rules of war, including the humanitarian aid for sure right now. But then in terms of the clout of Bibi, in terms of this future clout, of course he would be using it in order to get appeal from his public. But I would suggest that it will start to erode.
Possible.
Because this is, we've never been in such a position.
Short-term, mid-term, long-term?
Exactly,
maybe long-term.
Long-term, because the Israeli leaders would be accused of war crimes. Okay, it's unjust and everything is right. Of course, it's absurd, we accept. But still, this is a stain on our history, and I think the Israeli public in the end would like to have seen Bibi out. I hope, but long term.
Well, the question right now also is, how the Israeli public is going to respond to having a leader in this situation, right? Should he be replaced with somebody who won't be facing the potential of arrest in over 120 different countries? There's obviously the principle whether or not this is right and how the Israeli public feels on that point or not.
It's this is a signal to Assad not to join the fray with Iraq bolstering its borders and not allowing Iran to carry out attacks from its territory. The Iranian axis is now limited in where it can operate, and so I definitely see this as a message to Assad not to join the fray, and this coincides with reports that Israel is deepening its ground operation along the demilitarized border with Syria to prevent any ground threats that may arise from Syria.
Dan, we have about a minute before we go to commercial break. This comes as we're seeing more Iran-backed forces building up in Syria from Iraq. Also reports of well, okay, that's actually what I wanted to get at more specifically, is how Iraq relates to what we're seeing right now.
Well, Iraq has all these militias, Iraqi militias that are basically Iranian proxies, and Iraq doesn't want them to be deployed because it wants no part of Israeli counterattacks. This whole thing raises the fundamental question of Syria, almost unrelated to the current war. Is it a completely failed state? Is it a no man's land like Lebanon was, where Assad can say, I'm sorry, but I have no control? Or if these militias are using part of Syrian territory, can the world go to Assad and hold him accountable the way it never did hold Beirut accountable for Hezbollah? It actually isn't completely clear, and depends what part of Syria they're using. I think Assad is being very careful because he fears basically assassination.
Right.